Okay, Grandma, I'd like you to state your full name and today's date.
Edna Marie Lee, January
22nd.
22nd. I was trying to think whether it was the 23rd.
2009. And how old are you today?
91 years.
Okay. All right, I'm just going to start off with some questions, and if anyone has any interjections, just go right ahead.
Mama does.
Okay. By the way, my name is Abby Lee. Okay, the first question. Who is the most important person in your life, and can you tell us about that person?
It's difficult to make one most important person, but I would assume that I would have to say it was my husband, Dwight Lee.
Okay, and why was he the most important?
Well, he was the love of my life, and he was also a very smart, compassionate, caring man.
Okay. What was the happiest moment of your life?
Probably the day he got home safely from the World War II.
And that would have been what date? Or what year?
It was in 1944. In the fall, I believe.
That's fine. Okay, what was the saddest moment of your life?
I'm thinking.
Or we can move on and come back to that if you'd like. Well, we'll come back to that. Let's go back to the happiest moment. You said that it was when Grandpa came home from the war. What was that? Tell us about that day.
Well, I had written down. He was discharged at Fort Worth or at a air base. I don't remember the name of it, but it was an air base close to Fort Worth or either in Fort Worth. I can't remember what it was, but he was. And I had gotten a ride down with some people, friends of my parents in Florence. I was living in Florence with my parents. I had gotten a ride down with them. They were going down for some reason or other to Fort Worth. So that was really kind of fortuitous that I was able to ride down there. And I had gotten a ride down there, and I had a number to call to contact Dad when I got there, because he was still on the base. So I did that, and we had already, I think I had made a reservation in a hotel in Fort Worth, and that's where these friends of my folks let me off. And so I got in and got the room, and then I called Dad, and within about an hour he came. He had gotten into town. He had to wait for a ride somewhere or other, but he had gotten into town. And, you know, it was just such a wonderful time to see him and to talk to him, and to just to know that he was home and he was going to be safe from then on. That's why it was such a wonderful time. And we spent the night there, and then we got on a train and went home. And it was the Rock Island line. It was the closest we could get a train there. And the closest place it went to Florence was Harrington. So when we got to Harrington, my dad, Pop, and Grandma, and Phil, who was about 2 at that time, they were all waiting at the station when we got in. And I guess maybe that was part of the happiest time of my life, to get us all together and to be all together at home. And so all of those things, I mean, that picture of us getting into Harrington and looking out on the platform and seeing Grandpa holding Phil and Grandma there is very, very moving moment for me.
And how old were you then?
I would have been, 45. I would have been 28.
And how long had Dwight been, how long had it been since you saw him?
In excess of 3 years. Now that's not true. That's not true. That was how long it was in service. It was a little over, he was in Italy. I saw him, he got a leave just before he was sent to Italy. And that was about, that was sometime in 42. And I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was sometime in 42. And he got a leave then. And of course that was the last time I saw him until I saw him after he was returned.
And you wrote letters every day.
Every day. Didn't get it. He wrote very frequently, but I guess he got his letters the same way I got mine, in bunches most of the time. I mean, I went down to the post office. That was my usual routine. I would put Phil in his stroller, and it was 6-7 blocks to the post office, and at 1:30 or 2 o'clock, which is about the time they would have the mail in, I went down there to see if there was a letter or not. And many times there was, but many more times than that, there would be either 6 or 7 or none at all, because they kind of came in bunches, and according to what Dad said, they did. And one time I went 3 weeks and I didn't get a letter, and I was just beside myself, didn't know what to do or anything about it. And then I finally heard from him, and I discovered that he had been in the hospital with malaria and had been really sick, and that's why I hadn't heard from him, because he had been so sick with malaria. And
when you got a series of letters, Mom, did you open them from first date going forward, or the most recent date going backwards?
well, I wanted to see the last one that he wrote, because that would have any news of any any consequence. Probably if there'd be something that I really ought to know, that would be what I'd know. So I would pick out the one that was the last one to read first, and then I would start through them all again. And I read them over and over many times. And
Okay. Let's sort of backtrack a little bit. Well, a lot. Let's talk about your childhood. You were born in Centralia?
Centralia, Kansas.
In 1917.
Yes.
And,
At home.
And what's your earliest memory?
I think I can remember going over to my grandparents' house, and I think I can remember one of my dad's sisters who was in a wheelchair, because probably nobody ever knew for sure, but she probably had polio when she was young, and she was in a wheelchair. And in my mind, I swear I can remember going in, and I remember the room. It was kind of a living room type, not the parlor, but the living room, and seeing her sitting in that chair. And I think I can remember that, but it's hard to tell for sure whether all of this is imagination or not. But I think I can remember that. And then the next thing I remember is when my sister Barbara was born, when I was not quite 5. And I can remember I went around to all of the neighbors. My dad woke me up. My mother was really mad because he woke me up. She was provoked, at least, as he woke me up at 6 o'clock because he couldn't wait any longer to tell me I had a new sister. And I got up, and the first thing they knew, they didn't know where I was. And I had gotten on my tricycle, and I went all around the neighborhood and knocked on people's doors and told them I had a baby sister, you know, and they and they found me. Somebody had asked me to come in and eat breakfast. And they found me, and the neighbors about a block away, and they had asked me to come in and eat breakfast with them. And I guess they probably figured out that sooner or later somebody would be coming looking for me. But I did it on my little old tricycle, and that's what I can remember that.
And what were your brothers and sisters' names and their age in relation to you?
The baby sister I was talking about was Barbara Pauline, and she was not quite 5 years. I would have been 5 in July, and she was born in May, so it's essentially 5 years. Then my sister Alice was born in August in 1924, 2 years later, 2 years and some months later. So I was 7 years, definitely 7 years, a little over 7 years older than she was. My brother Carl was born in July of 29, which would be, I was just past 12 at that. Well, actually, no. He was born 3 days before I was 12. He was born July 6th, and I would have been 12 on July 9th. One of the family stories is I was just mad as hops because he was a boy. Everybody else was delighted to have a boy in the family, but I was of the age when I thought boys were just useless, you know, and they were. I got over that pretty fast because he was pretty cute, but that's kind of the stories I've always heard. They just really kind of scolded me for talking the way I did because I had wanted another sister.
And if you could describe your childhood in a couple of words, how would you describe it? If it's possible.
Yes, well, you know, the word idyllic is probably too strong a word, but I had a very happy childhood, and things, the way I grew up, I think was a very happy childhood. This is more than 2 words, but I was able to roam a neighborhood, and apparently there wasn't any really reason for anybody to prevent me from doing that because, you know, I knew all the neighbors and they knew me and, you know, that sort of thing, and I played with their children and so on. And at one time on the block I lived on, there was 5, 6, 7, 8. There was 11 children, all within a few years of me, either a few years younger or just a couple of years older. In fact, I was one of the older ones, basically. And there was these 11 children, and we all got along real well, and we all had a good time, and we played all kinds of games and all that sort of thing. So I think in general, maybe idyllic is too strong a word, but I did have a very happy childhood.
How long were you in Centralia?
Until I was 18. I spent my entire life there until I went away to college.
And what was the town like?
Oh. Well, I guess it was just a small town, Kansas town was what it was. I was very happy there, and people were very good to me and that sort of thing. I suppose it was probably, by today's standards, I suppose it was ultra conservative as far as I'm concerned, but nothing about that bothered me, and I was just welcome any place I went. I went downtown anytime I had a dime by myself, you know, to buy something. Anytime I had a nickel, you know, I could do that sort of thing, and all the townspeople knew me and everything. You know, when you think about it, it's a wonderful feeling for a child not to run into a lot of strangers when they're going around, you know. The town was 600 and some people, 670 or something like that. And I bet there wasn't a person in town unless they had just moved in the last month or so who didn't know who I was and who didn't know who my parents were. So if I'd gotten into any trouble or was hurt or anything, why, there wouldn't have been any problem at all about that, because everybody knew. And what's that saying about everybody's children?
Takes a village to raise a child.
Hmm?
It takes a village to raise a
Yes,
child.
yes, that's a saying I was trying to get to. I mean, it takes a village to raise a child, and basically, I think in little towns like Centralia, that's exactly what happened.
And was it your sense, Mom, that Centralia suffered equally during the Depression with other communities, or more so, or less so, or what was your sense?
Well, I don't really think there was anybody who went hungry in Centralia. I really don't. They may not have had a really great diet or anything, but I had a girlfriend whose father worked for the WPA, and that was the best job he had, and they didn't have any money at all. But she was the only other girl in my class for a long time, this Roberta. But I was with her and them a lot, and I always thought I ate meals with them. I always thought they had pretty good food. In fact, sometimes I thought they had great food, because Roberta's mother cooked some things that my mother didn't think were very healthy, but but I liked them. But everybody had a garden, and everybody canned, and I think that had a lot to do with the fact that people had something to eat, because I know Roberta's mother. When I think about it, I can't tell you how big a garden that she had. It was, well, Roberta's house was on one corner, and there was another house on the other corner, and her mother gardened practically all the land in between there. She planted things in there, and she had a huge garden, and I think a lot of people did that. I mean, I think a lot of people raised gardens, and then they had things to, and lots of folks had fruit trees in those days, and they had fruit in the summer, and if they had any excess, they canned that. And so nobody had any money, that's for sure. But I don't think I can't really even think of anybody in Centralia that I ever heard about that I thought actually didn't have food to eat, who had to miss some meals because of that. And I think that's the explanation for it, is between the gardening and the fact that they did a lot of canning in the summertime,
And backing up a little, who were your parents?
okay. My mother maiden name was Edna Alice Wadley, and my father's was Carl Howard Gaston, and mother was an only child, born to her parents fairly late in life, and she was probably a very fortunate child, in the sense that there was a maiden sister who lived, a spinster sister who lived with my grandparents, and then mother was the only child, and so I don't think they spoiled her, but they certainly did give her every advantage that they could think of, that was available to them, and she got to go to college, and she got to take music lessons and all that sort of thing, and I remember this spinster aunt on one of her birthdays, I suppose she saved money, but it's hard to see how she could have done it, but she gave my mother, it's the same one who gave my mother that watch when she was 16,
Mm-hmm.
but a couple of years before that, she gave Grandma a piano. And, that must have been quite a gift in those days. I mean, it's quite a gift today to give your niece a piano, And she gave, and my mother had that piano from as long as I can remember.
And I think Grandma was the only woman who graduated in her college graduating class. Is that right?
I think so. I'm not sure about that, but I think so.
And when and where was she born?
She was born in Centralia in 1892.
Centralia, Kansas.
In March the 4th, 1892. And Grandpa was born on a farm, which I suppose you would call Seneca for the mailing address, but it was between Centralia and Seneca.
And that would be your dad?
My dad, yes. And he was born January 19th, 1890. He was 2 years older than Mother.
And what was his name?
My grandfather's?
Your father.
Carl
Middle name? Last?
Howard. Carl Howard Gaston.
And did you have a date when he was born, or?
When he was born?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, January 19th,
Okay.
1890.
Okay. And what would you say your parents were like?
Well, my mother was I'm trying to think. It was. She was a very conscientious person about everything that she did. She was extremely interested in everybody doing everything the right way. And so sometimes it was a little difficult for us, but on the other hand, I'm very glad that she put some of those skills into us, because, you know, they're the things that she was trying to get us to do all the time. Sometimes we thought were sort of, you know, over the line, but they probably weren't. It was just that we, as children, we just weren't very interested in doing some of those things. But she was very conscientious. She was a good musician, and she played the piano and sang. For years, she sang at funerals. And then after that, she played when she quit singing, she still was playing the piano for church and for the funerals and things like that. And Dad, I always thought was I don't have anything to prove it, because he didn't have any education particularly, but I always thought he was a very smart, intelligent man. And one of the things I can remember is when we took 8th grade math, arithmetic, and everybody said 8th grade arithmetic was really hard, you know. I mean, I heard that from everybody, you know. And a lot of kids said their folks couldn't even do it. Well, Dad didn't really have any formal education to speak of. And sometimes he couldn't tell me how to put it down the way the teacher wanted to put it down, you know, in the steps. But he always got the right answer when I'd ask him for help. He always got the right answer. I mean, that's just one little thing that I remember about it, but you know, that he was very, now my mother was sort of reserved, but Pop was not reserved. He was as gregarious as they come. And he was quite a talker, but he was a good father, and he taught me a lot of things. He was a guy, if I was unhappy or in trouble about things, I was more apt to go to Pop and talk to him about it than Mother, because Mother would just say, you know, buckle up and, you know, do your business, and just don't. Pop would sometimes, he would tell me things that make me feel better, you know. One time the kids were just, I was having trouble with some of the kids. They were just making fun of me and everything, and I think I was about 3rd or 4th grade, and I was in tears. I went home and I told Pop about it. And actually, as I think back, those kids were mean. They were just meaner than dirt, you know. But at any rate, I was talking about it, and I telling Pop I was crying. And I remember he said to me, I remember this to this day, and that's been about 80 years ago, or at least. He said, well, you know, he said, I've always noticed that if people are throwing things on a fruit tree, they're always throwing up toward the top so they can get the best apple down, or the best peach down, or the best pear down. And he said, sometimes that's the way it is with people. The people that they're making fun of and throwing things at, it's because they know they're good, and they are trying to put you down or something. Anyway, for whatever reason, that made me feel better, you know. I remembered that all these years, and every once in a while he'd do things like that. And he would do some other things. sometimes irritated me, but didn't irritate me, but I thought, oh dear. I played basketball. And I wasn't probably, I loved it, but I didn't have a lot of native skills, you know. I just finally got to be fairly decent at it, but it was because I worked hard at it and practiced enough. But Pop was a real athlete. I really think that if he had been been in the time when kids got scholarships, could go to school, I think he was good enough athlete that he would have gotten a foot, maybe not a football, but a basketball or a baseball scholarship. Baseball was his sport, really, and I think he was very good at that. But basketball, he took me to every one of the games. We didn't have buses or anything. Our parents took us to the games, wherever they were. And then when I got home, I knew what was going to be. We would get out in the kitchen and he'd show me I should have done this, or I should have done that. And he would have me there for half an hour telling me how to do things, you know. Of course, I guess some of it soaked in, because eventually I got to be what they said was pretty good, you know, by the time I was a junior and senior. But boy, did I dread those things and those after the game lessons, which I got from him all the time. But
Speaking of, you were kind of mentioning getting into trouble. Did you ever get in trouble at home? And if you did, can you remember the worst thing you might have done?
oh, I didn't get into a lot of real trouble. I really didn't, you know. But I remember one time I went with my class in high school, and we took a day off. I mean, we just, all of us walked out and didn't go to school that day. And I didn't get a whole lot of, I got somewhat punished by the school, you know. I mean, I forget what we had to do, but we had to stay in after school for a long time to make up the time and that sort of thing. I didn't get a particle of sympathy from my parents. In fact, they didn't really approve of it because, well, I hadn't got into this yet, but boy, education was a big thing. Now, my dad believed in it, and even though he didn't have any, he didn't say so much about it, but he did believe in it. And my mother, for crying out loud, you know, most of the kids I heard about when I went to college when I was 5 years old. My mother started talking to me about, you know, going to college when I was little bitty thing. So I never grew up and I ever thought anything except I was going to go to college. Most of my friends did not have parents with those expectations or thoughts, you know. But boy, my mother did, and of course, Pop, I think probably thought it was a good idea too. But mother was just really, she was a real believer in education, you know, and she always told me in connection with that, besides just the idea of getting an education, she said every young woman should know how to support herself. Even if you get married and have a good husband who supports you, which is I hope happens to you, but she said every young woman needs to know how to support herself, because you never know what might happen. You might be widowed, you might not be happy in your marriage or whatever. She said you need to have some kind of a background so you can go out and earn your own living. And anyway.
And where did she go to college?
Washburn.
And what did she major in?
Music.
In music.
Yeah.
And did your dad get through 8th grade? Is that what he did?
Well, I think he got through 8th grade. I'm not absolutely sure. You know, his father was a very, I guess from what I've heard, was a very advanced farmer for his day. I mean, he farmed a lot of land, and he used a lot of the practices that were maybe not so common in those days, but he knew about them. But, you know, if you farm that much land, and in the 1890s and early 1900s, you needed a lot of manpower, you know. So they took the boys out of school, just like you've heard, I'm sure you've heard this, that they took the boys out of school in the spring, you know, as soon as it got to be time to do the spring planting and so on. And so I was never really sure whether he was a pretty good reader, and I don't know how he got that, but then because he read the Kansas City Times from cover to cover the minute it came. He sat down and read the paper, and so I know, you know, he was a pretty good reader. And then, well, this was my mother's doing. After they began dating, my mother encouraged him to go to a business college at York, Nebraska. And he went up there, and he did get through that, he did get through that business college, and he learned a lot of things, I suppose, about math and things like that up there at York, Nebraska. But that was and as certainly he never went to high school. My grandfather and grandmother had, 10 children who lived, had 11, but one died. 10 children who lived, and the only 2 that never got to high school were the last 2. And those 2, by that time, things had changed, and attitudes had changed, and so on. Maybe they didn't need the help so bad, or maybe they were prosperous enough they didn't need them. I don't know why, but my youngest uncle and my youngest aunt, they graduated from high school, but they were the only 2 who, out of the 10, who went all the way through high school.
What was your father's occupation while you were in Centralia?
Well, when I was born, he and my grandfather together owned a hardware store. And then, I don't know exactly, maybe I was 2 or 3, 4, somewhere along in there, that burned. And Grandpa was not of an age, he didn't choose to want to start all over again. And my dad bought the local telephone exchange. And in those, you probably knew something about how it wasn't like AT&T, everybody had, you had, so he had the local telephone exchange there. And then he also bought a building and started a movie theater, and he ran that 4 nights a week, like Sunday and Monday and Friday and Saturday for some extra income. And then he had this telephone exchange. And I worked there quite a bit when I got in high school at the telephone exchange. Number, please.
Let's see. If you could describe what you looked like when you were a teenager, young adult, how would you describe yourself? We have pictures, but I'd like to hear it from you.
Well, to tell you the truth, I thought I was homely as mud. I've heard since then that everybody, when they're in teenagers, has that feeling. You know, nobody thinks they're. And I guess as I look at myself now, 70 or 80 years later, I have to admit I don't think I was homely as mud. You know, but I thought so when I was growing up, and I thought I was too fat. All of the things that teenagers think, you know, but they did. But that's what I thought. It wasn't. I guess I was happy, so I guess it wasn't. It didn't just drive me into tears or anything like that. But that's basically, you asked what I thought, and that's kind of what I thought. I wasn't very proud of my looks or my figure or anything else, you know. But I always thought it could have been better. It should have been better.
Do you remember a favorite outfit from when you were either a little girl or a teenager?
Yeah. Well, I can remember 2 or 3 of them. I had one, I can't think of it. Made me look like Little Red Riding Hood when I was a little child. But it was a darling outfit, you know. It must have been a pretty, you know, I think I was kind of pampered for quite a while because I was the only child for 5 years, you know. And it was red with little fur on the collars, you know, a little jacket, a little suit coat, and then a dress and a blouse, kind of a navy blouse that went with it. I loved that outfit, and, you know, I thought it was pretty. And then my mother made me an organdy formal when I was a junior, and I was real proud of that. I mean, I expected it wasn't much by today's standards, but it was, I thought it was pretty. And I had my picture taken in it, and I was pretty happy with my picture that time, you know, because I had this new lavender long gown and that sort of thing, you know.
And lavender is your favorite color, is it still?
Yeah, it is. It's still one of my favorites, and And that's what I had as soon as I was old enough to tell anybody what color I wanted when they were painting my bedroom. That was always what I told them I wanted was lavender bedrooms.
Was that a junior prom where you?
Yeah.
Did you go with a date to the prom, or did
No, I
everyone
didn't.
just go?
No, I didn't. I just went. I didn't have a date, and actually I didn't have very many dates in high school. When I was a senior, I finally began to date. But you know, I don't know exactly what it was. I didn't care a whole lot about a lot of the boys. On the other hand, they didn't seem to care very much about me either. But but then I think that. But if you want to know what I honestly think, and I guess we are getting down to the honestly, what I honestly think is that I was so much smarter than they were, most of them, that I may have intimidated them. I don't know, but I did have a lot better grasp of all of our subject matter in school than those fellas did for the most part. When I was a senior, there was 2 guys that I went with pretty steadily, and actually, one of them, when we got so serious, I heard my mother. She didn't know I heard this, but I heard my mother say to Carl, to my father, she said, "Carl, times were hard, but she said we have got to get that girl away to college, or she'll end up marrying Ivan and be a farmer's wife." I can remember my mother just saying that. Maybe she meant for me to hear it. I don't know.
Yeah, that might be.
But I did hear it.
And you said that, am I correct that you maybe were proposed to a couple of times before you were actually married, or?
Yeah, I had several choices. I didn't take any of them, obviously.
Did you have a nickname?
Eddie, or Eddie Ree. A lot of folks in Centralia called me Eddie Ree. You know, Eddie and then the Ree from Marie. A lot of them. Because I always went in Centralia, you know, in those days you went by your double name. If you had a double name, you were called by that double name, Edna Marie. And I was always called Edna Marie in school and everything else. But a lot of folks outside of school, you know, they would call me Eddie Ree.
A question from Maggie was, what did you do before air conditioning in the summer to keep warm? Or cold?
Oh, well, I can remember at home that after lunch, assuming I could do it, and sometimes they hollered at me about it, I went in and got my book and sat in the bathtub. Sometimes for 2 hours
Cold
at a time.
bath?
Mm-hmm. Sometimes for 2 hours at a time. But
And I remember, you've talked about the summer 36 at K-State, where you would put sheets
Oh, yeah.
in the bathtub and then put them on your bed again.
right. That was at K-State the summer I went there, and then again when I was taking some graduate courses at Emporia, I did the same thing over at Emporia. I'd wring out those sheets every night because it helped you to get to sleep. By the time they were dry enough, well, it had cooled off enough, and you were probably cool. Anyhow.
When did automobiles become important or common? You know, when you were.
We always had a car, as far as I can remember. I don't. So I never remembered a time when we didn't have a vehicle to go a car to go somewhere in, and I kind of think. Well, I kind of think they had a car when I was born. Or I think my grandfather and my grandfather never learned to drive a car, but I think he and Grandma told Pop that they'd help pay for a car, and then so that he could take them places, you know, and I think that was I don't know that for sure, but I think that was the case. But there's a kind of a story that I think is amusing. My grandfather and my dad went to Kansas City to get a new car, and they bought a Hupmobile, which was at that time. And the salesman told Dad to get in, and he'd show him how to drive it. And they drove a few blocks, the story is, with the salesman driving, and he was telling them things about it. And then he stopped and got out, and he said, "Get in." And Pop drove a few blocks, and the guy said, well, you ought to be able to get home. And he drove to Centralia with no more instruction than that.
Well, and I think it's, as I recall, Mom, when you were at K-State, however, there were only 2 kids on campus who owned cars.
There were just 2 kids. When I it was not, certainly wasn't. One of them was a kid from, who I don't remember who it was, but I remember it was a boy, and he came from way out in western Kansas, maybe Liberal or someplace like that. And I suspect that his father was one of those who got in on the gas or oil exploration, because he had a real nice car. The other one was a young woman, June something or other. Her father had a wholesale company of vegetables and fruits, canned stuff. I can't think of the name.
Fleming?
Yes, June Fleming. Yeah.
And I take it from the fact that you know the names that K-State was pretty small back then. When would you have gone to K-State?
I went in 36.
1936.
I guess it was 35 when I graduated from high school, so it'd be the year of 35, and 36 was my
36,
first.
and then to 1940 is when you graduated?
I graduated in 38 because I did it in 3 years.
Oh, okay.
And I graduated in the summer school of 38 after I'd started in 35. And I think the enrollment was 2,000 and something.
And how far away was Manhattan, Kansas from Centralia, Kansas?
62 miles.
And so how did you get back and forth?
My dad drove me back and forth. He was real good about it. I was so homesick at first, I didn't think I could stay there. I knew I had to, because I knew what everybody had done was they were making lots of sacrifices to send me. But I couldn't. I would just cry at night, and I just felt terrible. I lost 20 pounds the first semester I went to college because I couldn't eat. My stomach, every time I took some food, I just felt sick. And I think Pop and Grandma knew that, so they came and got me as often as they thought they could, which was about every 2 or 3 weeks. They'd come and get me for the weekend, and I would go home. But they never mentioned my not staying, and I never mentioned it either, because I knew that was just something wasn't going to happen. That I just couldn't do that after everybody had made so many sacrifices to send me.
And what was...
And I'm sorry, Abby. One time, Grandpa had a wreck, didn't he, coming to get you at Manhattan?
Well, I don't remember. I don't remember that. I remember one time he had a flat tire on the way back, and I was late to my speech class, and my speech was all ready. I knew it like crazy, but this guy had a rule: if you weren't there, he didn't accept any excuses, sickness, anything like that. And the reason I remember this so plainly, I would have had a 4.0 average for that year, except he gave me a B, and because I didn't give that one speech, so that is burned into my memory. I don't think it was quite fair even to this day, but that's the way it was, that I think I had 3.90 something, but for the semester, but it was that B that took me down from, I had A's and everything else for the 2 semesters, but anyway, that's a long time ago. And
What was your major in college?
Well, I started out, I was going to be a home economist with food and nutrition, which I was still interested in. But I don't know if it's the first or second semester. One of the courses I had to take was art. And I was so terrible at it, and I hated it because I wasn't any good at it, So I got to thinking, I'm going to change my course. So I had always been kind of interested in the news business, and so I changed it to journalism. And I kept a minor. I got 28 or 29 hours in food and nutrition at Manhattan because I kept a minor there, and I took several. When I had some courses that weren't required, I took several of those. So I did take quite a lot of my original intention when I have a food and nutrition, but they were making me take that art class because of the clothing and textiles, which I was never terribly interested in to begin with, and so that's that story.
What's the What was the proportion of women to men at K-State then?
Well, there weren't, it was a lot more men than women, which is certainly different than it is now. And I don't know what the proportion was, but I do know, I mean, I can't give you a figure, but, well, you know, it's kind of like, in my high school, there was about 18 or 19 of us graduated, and, let's see, I guess 4 of us ended up going to college, some college. One other fellow and I were the only ones who actually graduated from college, but there was 4 or 5 of us who started. One girl, there was another girl, and she took the 2-year course. In those days you could teach school if you just had a 2-year course, and she took the 2-year course and then got schools to teach. And one boy took engineering, and basically he was not interested in school, period. His parents were interested in having him go, but he wasn't interested in it, and he didn't last very long. The other boy went to KU, and he became a lawyer, and he went.
Any minority students at K-State when you were there?
Very few.
Any at all?
Oh, yeah, there was a few. I didn't know any of them. I knew a couple of 3 foreign students, you know. There's always been foreign students who take some of those courses at KU because there's certain areas like in the milling and that kind of stuff. They're pretty outstanding, you know, in that area. And actually, I dated a boy from Iran for a little while.
From Iran?
Uh-huh. And I don't know, but his father must have had money running out of his ears, because he sure did. This kid did, you know. And he had a car. This was when I was a senior, and I guess when I was talking about when I first went there was only 2. So this fella would have been 3 at least. He had a car, and that was a big incentive when you were dating. You know, you could like almost anybody if you had a car.
What you talked about your major, but what would have been your favorite subjects, just in general, studying, you know, growing up in school or
History,
and what was your least favorite subject?
physics.
Did Centralia have physics
Mhm.
classes? Who
Had a
were,
good teacher, I think. I just didn't like it.
and was that because of the math part or just?
I don't know. It just didn't interest me. It didn't. You know, like history was I was just fascinated with reading my lessons and that sort of thing, and studying the physics rules and all that kind of stuff just didn't give me a bit of fun. It didn't give me a bit of it. I wasn't interested in it.
What, who were, I think I know the answer to this, but if you could name a best friend, who would that be?
Well, for quite a few years, from the time I was a 5th grader until I was a junior in college, my friend was Helen Camel, my best friend, who's still my best friend. And her father was a Methodist minister there, and during the summer between the sophomore year and the junior year, he was transferred to Phillipsburg, to a church in Phillipsburg. So this just about broke both of our hearts and everything. But we've always kept in contact, you know, and visited whenever we could, back and forth. And I had a couple of other really good friends. I mean, you know, I had several pretty good friends. One of them I still call and talk to, is Rose Evelyn, who married a cousin of mine, and she's living in a home in Sabetha, pretty good shape. My cousin's dead. They both moved over there. But I talk to her every once in a while, Rose Evelyn Dormer. And she was in my class, but she's a year younger because she went to country school. And in those days, all the country school kids started when they were 5. So when they came to high school, they were a year younger than the other kids, those of us who went to town school and had to wait till we were 6 to start. But I went all through high school with her, and she's, you know, and actually I've gone back to Centralia when I used to go back to Centralia, I would stay with them, you know, and, well, you know, that's where I would stay after she married my cousin.
Let's see. What was your favorite type of music? Or what is your favorite type of music? Favorite song or favorite singer?
Well, I guess I like jazz better than anything else.
And a favorite artist? Or a genre of jazz?
Well,
Or just like it all?
I like it all, and the trouble, I know who I like, but to tell you the truth, I can't come up with their name, and I have trouble with names, and being 91 years old, I have trouble with remembering names at times. But anyway.
Do you need a break yet?
No. I'm all
So
right.
when did you and how did you meet Dwight?
Well, when I went to teach at Ellsworth, the teachers at that time, many of them, practically all single, ate 2 meals a day at a woman's house. This woman was she was a very good cook, but she was doing it because her husband was a banker in one of those banks that went kaput in Ellsworth. So she started taking in. She had 2 roomers, and then she fed teachers at noon, and there was no cafeterias in those days, and we all walked down to her house for our noon lunch, and then in the evening we went over there for the noon lunch. Well, Dwight was one of the 2 roomers that she took in. I had heard about Dwight before I got there, however, so I at least knew who he was. There was Dwight at one time, before we ever moved to Florence, which is where my folks moved after I was in college. When Dwight got out of school, he worked for the highway department. And he was stationed, or not stationed, but he was living in Florence for, 6, 8, 9 months, something like that, while they were building, I guess it would be 90, wouldn't it, Chuck? Or 50.
50, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They were working on 50 from about Strong City to Newton.
Uh-huh.
And they were headquartered for whatever reason, they were headquartered in Florence. And one of the fellows that I knew in Florence was telling me when he found out I was going to Ellsworth, he said, you ought to look up a fellow that went up there named Dwight Lee. So he told me a little bit about him, so I did know who he was when he got there. But when I got there and found out, I didn't know that he'd be eating at the same place that I was, but he was.
And how did you know that he was the one you were going to marry?
Well,